as a bass player, you get to hear a lot of different instruments in orchestra, and you get to hear a lot of everything when you play with a full orchestra with all the woodwinds and brass. But you don't hear everything that could have been because there are so many instruments that have been lost to time. So, for my Odyssey question, I asked, why have some instruments withstanded the test of time while others fell to the wayside long ago? I mean, I play orchestra, but there are so many instruments from history that I know about, but so few are played in modern music that I want to know why remove the hundreds of others over time. To help me narrow down this question, I decided to focus on the story of the Viol family, and specifically the Viola da Gamba, or bass viol, as it's called in English, because they were the predecessors for modern stringed instruments and played alongside the ones we have today for several centuries. Viols were made in three main sizes: treble, tenor, and bass, and later the double bass rounded out the family. That's what I played. The trebles were comparable in size and range to violins, the really high, small, squeaky ones. The tenors were close to violas, which is what I have to help visualize what, and yes, it's not a violin, it's a viola. It's what I have to visualize. And then the bass viols were comparable to a modern cello. And the double bass, it is still played today. However, while modern instruments have 4 strings each, the viols had 6, tuned in fourths instead of fifths, so you had a slightly different interval between each string. They are also designed with several differences in body shape, such as a more sloped upper connection to the fingerboard. They had deeper ribs, so they cut in deeper, and along the back, it came out more before going down the instrument. They also had frets along the fingerboard, while modern violin or viola does not. This design is most reflected in instruments such as guitars, ukuleles, and mandolins that are still played today. What you're about to hear is a playing of a bass viol from Jonathan Manson, principal cellist of the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. He also did, from this video, he explained the differences between a modern instrument such as a violin or viola and the old viols. As you just heard, the Viola da Gamba had a warm and intimate tone, but was also a more hollow tone. So it was useful for filling something like a large dining room, maybe a lounge in a mansion, or a townsperson's house. However, their sound was lost in the grand concert halls that began to appear in the late 1700s. As time rolled on, these concert halls became ever more popular, and centuries later, the viols would lose their place with the composers in the time. I learned this from the Britannica article about viols, which also mentioned that the concert halls became larger to accommodate more people, because more people were able to indulge in nights out, and because the economy changed. And so they kept getting bigger and bigger, and viols kept getting more and more obsolete. Some classical conductors, most notably Johann Sebastian Bach, tried to use viols, specifically bass viols, to create harmonies for the harpsichords that they also used at the time. But that didn't last long, and it soon fell out of fashion alongside the rest of the viols, except for the double bass, which is obviously still in use today. The issue of projecting sound all the way across these grand halls was solved in the form of the violin and the violoncello to match it, though in other ranges. If you've ever heard one played, you know that it has a tendency to sound strong from any distance, no matter how far you are, except when it's extremely close, where it's squeaky. This made it unpopular for small rooms where the viol family would shine, but they were excellent at sustaining loud notes across the vast halls. So they would be used by conductors instead of the viols, and they slowly disappeared from that. These events happened to many Western instruments, explaining why so many fell out of style. Famous composers gravitated towards instruments that could fill a concert hall, like violins and flutes and French horns and cellos, and these instruments also worked well in larger groups, while instruments like viols and pan flutes fell out of favor because no one wanted them in their orchestra. More people learned to play the instruments they saw on stage because more people knew about them, and voila, the medieval instruments that people knew centuries ago, no one's heard of them today. So that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. And so that answered my question as to why certain instruments disappeared, but I still want to know why don't they come back in the small settings that we have, where so many people are playing live music in quartets and trios and in small shows. I wonder if we were to reintroduce them again, would people start to use them again? And that's what I would like to know in further research of this topic. And I'd also like to know, was the story similar or different in other parts of the world, or was it just as times changed, instruments fell out of style? So, but the information I have, it works for what I needed. So, yes. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.